Darius Mirshahzadeh. I love hanging out, man. I'm so glad that we got you back in the studio because we've actually had you once before, but the format of our rambling did not quite fit the frame of Beyond a Million.
I think I got drunk during that show.
You think?
You're like, you want to try some amazing bourbon? And I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That went sideways.
It was fantastic. I don't even think it went sideways. It was perfect. We had lots of fun, talked about lots of great things, and we have that one. It's not even locked in the vault. It's just chilling. It's chilling, waiting for an occasion. It was a blast.
That was fun.
But today, I want to talk about specifically things that you've done phenomenally well with, which is founded on building companies. So you've built a few companies, and you have been the operator of them. Can you give me just backdrop stats, numbers, the last couple companies, because it's impressive and it's a good place to start?
Yeah. So my biggest win was the last win, and as a company called The Money Source, TMS is what we go by, go by now. One of the largest mortgage services in the United States. I got there in 2013. I did a joint venture with the owner, became an owner thereafter. And from 13 through, when we got there, it was a pretty small company, about 30 employees, grew to 1,000 employees in 3 years.
Good God.
Yeah. It was a rocket ship, man.
And these are W-2 employees?
Straight up. I'm not even including outsource. I'm not including anything else. Like people who I was paying their health insurance and 401k matching.
And your role was?
I was CEO of the company. I was an owner. Of the company. 4 of us who were owners, and I was chief executive officer. And I was kind of like the brains around scale. How do you scale this thing? That was my part. Did over those years, we grew it. The biggest we got to was 209 million in revenue per year.
Awesome.
We did collectively about 1.2 billion in the 7 years I was CEO. And not like a bullshit pass through like someone else's revenue account in his mind. Like this is like legit our money.
I love that. I love that disclaimer.
Yeah. Well, you see it sometimes. People are like 8-figure CEO. And I'm like, you're a trucking company and you're counting the inventory of somebody into your revenue numbers. Like that's kind of bullshit.
I see it a lot of times.
A lot of people do that, right?
Totally.
And I just, no, I'm like, well, that's not really revenue. If I count, because we use like brokers were our clients. I didn't count they get 3 points on every deal. I didn't count that in the revenue. That's our piece of the revenue. So it was a legit over $100 million company. But having been a serial bootstrapper, I grew 7-figure companies, 8-figure companies. And then that was my 9-figure company that I built. I exited the company in July 20. I think that year they did 400 million in revenue. So I take credit for that, even though I wasn't the CEO.
You should.
I'm like, hey, and they may have even hit $500 million. But it was a big deal. Like I learned a lot about how do you grow companies, right? How do you scale every aspect of the business? Because I'm pretty hands-on. And since then I've gone on, I advise a bunch of entrepreneurs and CEOs, mostly 8 and 9-figure CEOs, some 7. I know if 7 feels big to a lot of people. For me, it's like that's kind of the first step when you have people that you got to go manage, like where you have management.
Yeah.
But I can kind of see it through all the way. Prior to that, I did joint ventures and I was entrepreneur and CEO of my first company. I had built an 8-figure company through a joint venture. That was a very quick win. Prior to that was a company I built with my brother called Twin Capital Mortgage. So all this was in the mortgage lending space.
Got it.
And I did every part of it. Retail, wholesale, correspondent, which is where you're the bank lender for lenders, servicing, where we're servicing loans for people. So every aspect of the business I've done. And with Twin Capital, I was 25 when I started that company, and I started it myself and like an assistant. And I grew it from that to almost 10 million in revenue in 3 years.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. So we were number 40 in the Inc. 5000, 40 fastest private growing company in the United States. I was in my mid 20s. I had no fucking clue what I was doing. Like none. So what I ended up doing.
What years were those?
Those 03 to 06 was when we did Inc. And those growth years. 06 was when we peaked out. We were like 8.6 million, 8.4 million. And then 07 was when the mortgage market imploded.
You don't say.
I was on track for 10 million that year.
Yeah.
And then I quickly went from about 800K run rate per month to under 200K.
Woo!
If your run rate goes from 800,000 a month to $150,
there's some cash flow problems.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
So I
say it lightly.
So I went that month that happened was August of 07. In September of 07, I was at the Inc. 5000 conference, black tie affair, getting my award.
Love it.
And I would joke that I said I
brutal.
was the 40th fastest shrinking company in the United
Oh,
States
brutal.
when I went to get that award. So it sucked. But what had happened was, which was interesting, was a year before that I got accepted into a program at MIT called Birthing of Giants.
I've heard about this.
It's a pretty famous program. Got to be under the age of 40. Back then, it's changed now, but you have to be under the age of 40. You need to have a super high growth company. It's like 10% acceptance rate, and it's 3-year program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into it, and that was when because in like 06, I had this hyper growth company. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I nicknamed myself the firefighter. And what I would do is jump from department to department, putting out fires 30 days at a time. Mm-hmm. And then I'd be back in ops, sales, marketing, those kind of my
Jesus.
Yeah, it sucked.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, probably a lot of people, right?
100%.
Those are 3 important parts of the business, right?
It's also sort of the gap of the 0 to 1 million. It's a notable accomplishment, and you get to 1 million, then you realize that the gap from there to 10 is a different thing.
Yep.
Right, and the systems and processes or lack thereof are the struggle, and the good people might be the struggle. Also, it depends on the industry. The question, there are so many different things to dig into because you've done the 7-figure, the 8-figure, the 9-figure. You've done 1 to 3 employees in the company to 1,000 employees in the company, all in the same industry. So you've got basically the model, but you have to have done things differently from one to the other to grow that way at different times. But the question before we get into that I'm curious about is you went through, mortgages are so directly tied to economic growth and decline. When you went through the next phases of the 8-figure and the 9-figure companies, did it adjust the way you operated thinking about the cycles? Like right now, for example, in September of 2022, we're in a down cycle for mortgages. And my friends that have mortgage companies, half their business disappeared right away because rates went up. So refis disappeared and revenue disappeared.
Right. So mortgages, I always say the average temperature in mortgage is 50 degrees year round. It just half the time it's 100 degrees and half the time it's 0 degrees.
That's good.
Yeah. So a very volatile industry. So it's what that does is it makes you into a fucking athlete for scale. Because you scale up super fast, you scale down really fast. So I became this athlete. Like I'm like the LeBron James of scale because I need to be able to grow really fast to grab it when the rates are there. And then they'll peak and they'll come in really hard. And like, I don't need 1,000 people. So I didn't tell you the in-between. I told you what you wanted to hear.
Yes.
Right. Which was, there's a really good quote, which is success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. You heard this before?
No.
Yeah, it's really fun to talk about success. No one talks about the hard shit, right? So we went from 0 to 1,000 or 13 to 1,000 people or something like that in 3 years. In set 16 and November 16, Trump got elected and rates popped hard. I went from 1,000 to 450 employees in 4 months.
Wow.
Athlete, dude. Like high jump. And then I scaled it back to 1,000 over the next 2.5 years. So what I learned, especially I guess, now I advise a lot of companies of different shapes and sizes. I always tell them like 1,000-person company is really just 110-person companies, right? The difference is you need different scaffolding at these different, to support those groups of 10. If I have one group of 10, I don't need much scaffolding because there's only one group of 10 to manage. I have 10 groups of 10, I need different scaffolding to manage those 10 groups of 10 than I did the one group of 10. Just like when I have 100 groups of 10, I need different scaffolding than when I had 10 groups of 10. So that scaffolding is really like corporate infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And
I'm tracking.
Yeah, right. Totally makes sense, right?
Totally.
When you think of it that way.
Yeah.
Because I always say like a manager, it's not in my quote, it's like this is just like common knowledge. It's like a manager can't really manage more than 10 people effectively. So it's one group of 10 is like one little pod. The issue is, depending on how fast you grow, will depending how quickly you can put that scaffolding up, right? And it can be in any department, HR, accounting, marketing, sales, ops. No, that's most of them, right? Mm-hmm. So you need different scaffolding for different groups depending on how the velocity of scale and the how wide it is, right? So when I'm going to...
What do you mean how wide?
Yeah, so how many groups of 10?
Got it.
Right. So when I went from 30 to 300, I was just, 30 groups of 10. I actually you could get there pretty easily without a ton of scaffolding because you're still small enough. You're kind of like what they say, the perfect size of a tribe is 150 people. You're like 2 tribes, right? So you can kind of do it through muscle. You can kind of do it manually. I can do it just through a lot of it just through my own personality as a leader. I can kind of keep it all together. I know half the people's names off the top of my head as CEO. And so that kind of does work for me. I call that invisible scale, right? The culture has not been diluted that much because I can kind of like get there with and this works for charismatic leaders. If you're not as charismatic, you're probably not gonna be able to do it.
Right.
Your charisma will take you pretty far. It ain't gonna go much past 300 though.
No.
If you go to 500, 600, 700 employees, like you need real systems in place. So I start looking at, well, what types of systems do you have to manage those different areas of the business? So we use sales, for example. I have 10 salespeople. I can manage them. I can manage them off an Excel spreadsheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have 100. I can't. I need a good CRM. 30, I could probably get away with HubSpot. 150, I probably need Salesforce, right? Now I might be able to still get away with an automated HubSpot at 150 employees, 150 salespeople, or not, depending on how much automation it has, how much of the work it'll do for me, because humans can only take me so far. And I'm using that. I think that's a really good example, right? There's different types of systems for different size, also different need depending on what I'm doing in sales. So I look at that in every part of the business, right? Let's use HR, for example, or accounting is a good example. I can get away with QuickBooks at like up to maybe 100 employees. At a certain point though, my business is so complex that QuickBooks just doesn't work. It doesn't have enough automation. It doesn't have enough point of sale stuff. It doesn't have enough of, the things that I need to manage inventory. So now maybe I need a more integrated system. Well, part of that comes with revenue. Part of that comes with people. It's all depending on the size of the business. When I'm small, though, I have less clients. I'm not managing as many counterparties. So what I found was at different stages of growth, there's different systems I need, both technologically, both manually, and both managerially. And most entrepreneurs are not put in a position where they have to go make those changes. Some do it well, some don't. The ones that do it well grow and learn and implement those new systems. The ones that don't, they get stuck and they stop growing. But it comes a system game at a certain point and a strategy game. Strategy, I think, is less important though. I think strategy happens, people make a big deal about strategy, and mine's like, execution is the greatest differentiating value proposition, at least up to probably 1,000 employees. Beyond that, like strategy matters more so.
Yeah, I think that that's fascinating to hear your perspective on that. Also, the numbers that you're quoting are your numbers. And I know a hell of a lot of entrepreneurs that need systems far before 300 people.
Oh, hell
right?
Yeah.
That totally fail past like 10 or 5. And you also had a really good caveat, which was for a charismatic leader, right?
Yeah.
And there are also tons of entrepreneurs that aren't that, right? That lead by the numbers, that hide behind a desk, that are introverts. That's just their thing. In sales, I look at the parallel in sales with, you can get great salespeople that never have a system for anything. They don't even have a particularly structured approach to selling shit. It's the person that you point to, and they can quote unquote sell ice to Eskimos or insert funny phrase, right? But is that system repeatable?
No.
Right. Can you scale that?
No.
Like you can keep trying to hustle and find those.